Jennifer Maidrand, and the title of her paper, The Geo-Politics of Scriptural Green Lining in East Jerusalem. The Geo-Politics of Scriptural Green Lining in East Jerusalem. The biography I received about Jennifer is a bit outdated. She has previously worked with the Churches for Middle East, and her biography says she's a PhD candidate in Bible and Cultures at Drew University. I'm happy to say you passed. Almost without it, we can congratulate her. And I can say that because I had the honor of being one of the examiners for her dissertation, and I believe we're going to hear some of that dissertation this afternoon. Her research explores how biblical interpretation and archaeology have shaped the contemporary land of Palestine, Israel, and its geopolitics. Jennifer is a member of the United Church of Christ, is committed to fostering interfaith and intercultural community education and dialogue around sacred texts, the earth, and politics. And I must say, Jennifer is a dear friend. We've worked together on some projects, and I hope we can work on more. So, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you for doing some editing on the fly there, Munther. The last couple of months have held a lot of transition for me, hence a bio that's partially or half incorrect. It's such an honor to be here on this panel, just with some incredible thinkers and resistors, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. I situate myself as a biblical scholar, maybe most of the time or some of the time, as Grace would say, and I identify as a biblical scholar who is a white American Christian, as a settler in the land of Turtle Island, also known as the United States, and it's my positionality as a settler, as someone who's been a part of the settler colonial discipline of biblical studies and archaeology that fuel a lot of this work. And I'm going to share just a little bit about some of the research that I've been working on, part of a larger project, exploring how the development of Israeli archaeological sites and national parks, especially in East Jerusalem, served to construct narratives of promised land in the present and erase realities of Palestinian displacement and ongoing violence of settler colonialism. I'm going to share a few highlights and do something that I like to call excavating rather than interpreting biblical texts, kind of excavating some of their materializations, their physical and political realities. And this is a method and term that I borrow from the biblical scholar Vincent Wimbush, who I'm very shaped by. And so I'm excavating practices of scripturalization and greenwashing in key biblical historical sites by mapping out the ways that they overtly and covertly contribute to a phenomenon that I'm calling scriptural greenlining. So I'll define that a little bit more in a minute. But I'm analyzing the intersections between the Promised Land paradigm, which is a term that Palestinian historian Noor Masalha has written extensively on as an ideological construction, not a notion that's found in any biblical texts, but something that we have created in interpretation out of a number of biblical texts, singularizing them to one notion. And this is mostly Western, colonial, and primarily came out of kind of the birth of British Christian Zionism. But this understanding that there is a particular plot of land with particular borders that is promised to a people in time immemorial, and that is not only the story, the one story that we find in the biblical text, but the prescription for present realities, which of course elides the diversity of biblical texts that talk about various forms of conquest and no conquest at all, that talk about diverse borders of a land promised, and a loose and differing terminology about what promise even is. And so I'm drawing on this notion. So when you hear me say promised land, I'm talking about this constructed notion that I'm arguing is being kind of reconstructed in present realities in East Jerusalem. So Palestinian anthropologist Nadia Abdul-Hajj talks about the field of archaeology as being constituted of preconceived understanding of facts, of coming in with an understanding of what we think would be true in a particular context. In biblical archaeology, we would come with these understandings based on what we read in a biblical text, thinking we already know what we might find here, and then creating our methodologies, our practices of excavation around those already constituted notions. And so she, in her very, very important book, Facts on the Ground, talks about how, I'm going to read this quote for you because it's so stunning. She talks about how, quote, archaeologists carve particular kinds of objects out of the contours of the Earth's depths. They assemble material culture, henceforth embedded in the terrain itself. Facts on the ground that instantiate particular histories and historicities. And so it's kind of through this method and tradition that biblical archaeology came to root itself in a very particular way in Palestine during the British occupation of Palestine, giving preference to certain historical periods, all biblical periods, and especially those of conquest and settlement of ancient Israel. And so the development of biblical archaeology, which was shaped by British and American intellectuals and political leaders in the 19th century, was a part of this kind of broader epistemological movement that sought to displace texts with artifacts, thinking that if we can show with real physical evidence these things that we believe to be true, that those can hold this great and perhaps even greater value than some of our methods of just reading the texts on their own. And so this is all a part of the birth of archaeology in this region, which was primarily and unarguably for the interests of Western imperial Christianity. And so I want to kind of take this history and put it in conversation with contemporary realities, but use a scaffolding or a framework from Vincent Wimbush, who in his book, White Man's Magic, Scripturalization as Slavery, talks about this notion of scripturalization, which he calls a social, psychological, political structure establishing its own reality. He analyzes a novel called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, which is the story of an ex-enslaved African in Great Britain in the 18th century. And so he kind of excavates this, the experience of this person that's narrated through this novel, to think about the creation of religion through this lens of white domination in European society. And so he talks about the ways that scriptures are fetishized and used to establish political, social, psychological realities that are almost always created and sustained by those who are in power, primarily white folks in this context, in the settler colonial context of Palestine, in many other contexts that are similar that have kind of already been discussed here. And so he talks about it's not really the scriptures themselves. And so I think this is why it's helpful for us to think about promised land in this way, because it's not about one single scripture. It's kind of this conglomeration and this notion of a scripture. But it's not about the scriptures themselves, but he talks about it's the structures of power that they shape. And so I'm using this theory that he develops. He also talks about it kind of with language of magic, calls it sleight of hand that's happening, this sort of rhetoric of control that is happening in front of our eyes and yet is also invisible to a certain extent. There's another biblical scholar, Jacqueline Hidalgo, who draws upon this notion of scripturalization, grows it in important ways, and talks about scriptures being tools for creating social power and belonging, how they can both home and unhome people, how they can be tools of colonial conquest, but also in minority reconquest, as she calls it. And so it's these discourses of power that scriptures create in practices of homemaking and unhoming that I think about as I am working with this term scriptural greenlining. So when it comes to the context of Palestine, I am thinking about the construction of scriptures, especially in geographical areas that are vulnerable, that are contested, in areas where Palestinians are facing active displacement. And so I'm looking at East Jerusalem in particular, and at the city of David, which is an archaeological site turned national park that has a sort of narrative arc and constructed reality that I would argue is happening in a lot of places, in a lot of Israeli national parks, and in a lot of archaeological sites throughout Palestine. And so I'm just going to talk about some of the features of the city of David, just to help make some connections here. But scriptural greenlining, I argue, is when landscapes are refashioned to conceal cartographical borders that are already dynamic. And so it's when scriptures are used in politically strategic places and utilized alongside politically strategic ideologies, such as that of Promised Land. In this process, biblical archaeology sites and green spaces are curated and preserved as alluring sites of biblical tourism, which not only satisfy the historical curiosities and spiritual wants of visitors, but they construct very real realities that wield political power. And so the function of biblical archaeology sites and national parks with biblical heritage transform the appearance of different areas, like quite physically. Oftentimes reconstructing biblical villages or buildings, uprooting native trees, and planting non-native species. All of these things that are done, the narratives that are told on placards, the narrations that are done through, especially in the city of David, videography, and kind of VR reconstruction and experiences. All of these things create realities that when we encounter those sites, we are both our understanding of the Bible and of this idea of promised land is being informed, but also our understanding of the connection of that ideology with the contemporary place is being shaped as well. And so there are realities that exist in East Jerusalem that are disguised by these biblical realities that are sort of being constructed over top of them. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about what I see in the city of David that is so interesting to me and is kind of the best depiction of this. So the city of David is located just outside of the old city of Jerusalem on the southern slope. It's located in the Palestinian village of Solon, which has existed for over 100 years. Sorry, many more than 100 years. It was established in the 16th century, but today is a very, very vulnerable area of East Jerusalem. And so the green line, and green lining for me, is that a lot of these areas that are being developed are along the green line. So this is the armistice line that was drawn in 1948 after the 1948 war, so as to determine what would be Palestinian held territory. Those lines have not been respected, and Israel's transgression and erasure of those lines really has still not been recognized by the UN to this day, and yet is the reality that exists on the ground. And so this site has been excavated since 1860, and from the beginning has sought to prove the existence of a 10th century Davidic monarchy in Jerusalem. The Palestine Exploration Fund, which was a project of Great Britain, was the first to excavate in 1860, led by Charles Warren, an army lieutenant and key British archaeologist who was a part of this big project of a sort of sacred cartography, actually, a remapping of Palestine that erased and took all of the Arab names of places and regions and superimposed them with biblical ones. And so this was a tool of the British occupation and imperial colonial efforts, but also became a sort of roadmap for biblical archaeology once the entire region kind of began to be explored and excavated when biblical archaeology sort of took off in the 20th century. And so the site has been excavated continuously since 1995, just kind of sporadically throughout the 20th century. And most of the finds that have come from it are finds related to the Second Temple period, which is, if you're someone who likes history or archaeology at all, that is much, much later than the time period of King David. And so those are the majority of what the finds have told us about the area, and yet the narrative that is told is that this is a place that shows a Davidic occupation of Jerusalem, which of course is this continuation of the Promised Land narrative, that this is the place where Israel established its nations and actually has stayed. That's the understanding or the narrative that's portrayed. And so today, this site is managed not only by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, who manage all national parks, or not only by the IAA, the Israel Antiquities Authority, but also by a right-wing private settler organization that has done really aggressive work in annexing Palestinian territory in East Jerusalem and moving in right-wing Israeli settlers into their neighborhoods and into their homes that were very recently displaced. And so as that work is happening, they're expanding the city of David along the Green Line, even kind of towards the outskirts of Jerusalem, to create things like a zip line, a king's garden, which would remove an entire Palestinian neighborhood to create a sort of facade of this kind of unified ancient biblical city that's not founded historically or archaeologically. And so what I know that I'm out of time and didn't get much into the details that I think really kind of help us see the picture of how these political realities are created. My hope is that this kind of model of excavation is a tool that applies not only to this particular context, but for many of us who are in a variety of contexts, whether they be ecclesial or academic or invested in our own communities, that it can be one where we can excavate the very real ways that scriptures create realities and participate in settler colonial projects that in some ways we are always implicated in as associated with that tradition as readers of those same texts as those who visit these sites. So I'll leave it there. Look forward to the conversation.